an architect and content marketing manager here at Monograph. My name is Joanne. Now we are going to welcome our next speaker to the Section Cut stage, Karen Zabarsky. She is the founder and principal at Ground Up. She's going to be sharing with us how she builds a design practice and network of peers to collaborate on meaningful projects in the space between architecture, real estate, and technology. Karen, welcome to Section Cut.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining today, talking about taking the plunge in a new era of design, which I think will mean a bunch of different things to different people, and we're going to explore those options today. But I think this is just such an incredibly exciting time to be talking about this, because obviously, needless to say, and we've been talking a lot about this, the past 2 years have really flipped the snow globe. So many things have changed. So many industry-wide aspects and verticals have changed. So many roles have changed. There are new challenges, new opportunities, and it's really a moment to kind of refocus and re-energize yourself to what you really care about. And there are many different ways to do that and to dive into that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I happen to be wearing the same dress as in this picture, but I'm the founder and principal of Ground Up. We're a multidisciplinary creative studio for the built environment. And I'm consider myself kind of a COVID cliche, which I'll tell you guys about. I started out studying architecture and business, went to work for several architecture firms, including Shop most recently, and then moved into real estate development over the past 7 years, where I was overseeing design and branding. Before the pandemic, I really would have been happy working in my corporate job for life. I was working on incredible projects, large scale, small scale, super interesting. And I think I would have been a happy 9 to 5er, or in the architecture world, like 9 to 9, or for forever. And then the pandemic happened, and it was just like how we all experienced. The world was reacting and changing around us. I realized that life is short, and I decided that I wanted to take the plunge for myself in terms of a new direction for my career. So what that meant for me was more independence, more meaning in the type of work that I was doing, more flexibility. And so I decided to create Ground Up. And when I say flexibility, I mean also, of course, geographically and in terms of my time and lifestyle, but also in terms of the scope of work that I could present to the world, as Ground Up and as myself. Whereas, in previous positions in the more corporate environment, in more of an old school kind of format, my roles were a bit siloed, only design or only branding or only communications. And this really allowed me to kind of expand that so that it could be strategy, but also design and also branding and also communications in a very kind of cohesive and comprehensive way. And I'm obviously not alone in this. We've, of course, all been hearing about or experiencing firsthand, what was originally called the Great Resignation, and now I think much more accurately called the Great Reshuffling, or something to that extent, because I think it's much more accurate. Because in order to make a big change in our lives, or to create more meaning in our work, or to kind of shift in a new direction or take a dive into something, we don't necessarily have to resign. We don't necessarily have to, quit our jobs. We can do that, but there are a lot of different ways to do that. But the main idea is that after the past 2 years of what we've experienced, we all want to be the captains of our own ship, whether that's with our own company, within our organization, We all want to be the masters of our own domain. And I think over the past 2 years, some of us, not all of us, but some of us were lucky enough to experience a situation where we did have geographic freedom. We did have a little more creative freedom. We maybe had freedom in terms of our lifestyle and having time to explore things that we weren't able to explore previously in terms of interests or passions or talents. And if we were lucky enough to experience that, it's very difficult to go back to the old way of working where someone is delineating and defining that for us. So that kind of freedom can take many forms, and that kind of plunge that we want to take in a new direction can take many forms. It can be, doing what I did, which is literally quitting my job to start my own firm. It can also mean moonlighting on the side. But of course, entrepreneurship and freelancing have existed since the dawn of time. There are new ways now, I think, new openings to take that plunge in a post-pandemic world, which is, having flexible arrangements with employers. It's a moment where, and I'll, give you guys a few examples of that, but it's really a moment where employees are very much in the driver's seat and have the capacity to come up with new demands, new requests, new arrangement within their corporation. And then also figuring out a way to carve out your niche or do more meaningful work within the existing structure, within your existing role. So I'm going to take you guys through a case study of a recently completed ground up project, which kind of highlights the team that came together for the specific project and how each of those team members has taken the plunge in their own kind of unique and flexible way. So Silicon Harlem, just to give you all a little context, incredible organization. They're based in Upper Manhattan, of course. And their mantra is everyone needs a connection. That's what they say every day. Everyone needs a connection. And they've been really living that for the past 10 years. They are bringing broadband to residents of Harlem who haven't had, 40% of which don't have access to broadband in their home. They're connecting different sectors by bringing together big tech companies with governmental, elected officials, with community stakeholders and universities, and bringing everyone together to kind of come up with solutions to bridge the digital divide. And they also create programming for the local community, for students, for entrepreneurs to be exposed to new technologies and innovations that they may not have had access to otherwise. So I was brought in by Silicon Harlem. They had this really interesting 3,000 square foot space in Upper Manhattan. And they commissioned Ground Up to lead the design for their new innovation hub that was going to be built out in this space. So at that time, when they commissioned Ground Up was yours truly. I was working as a solopreneur on every single project, was almost 100% just me. And when I was commissioned for this project, I realized very quickly that I was going to need to expand my team very quickly in a very flexible way, and in a way that was kind of specifically tailored to the needs of this space. So I started reaching out to my network, reaching out to my, putting posts out on all the social media platforms, and people started to respond in a really interesting way. So the first team member that came together for this space was IASIS Labs. IASIS Labs is run by a young woman named Stephanie Silverman. She and I used to be colleagues back in the corporate world, and she has since gotten a different full-time job. She's a licensed architect, and she came up post-pandemic. She came up with a flexible arrangement with her boss, with the owner of the company, so that she can work full-time for them 3 days a week and 2 days a week on building her own company, building her own organization. And she decided to take that plunge after lockdown, after the pandemic, when she really felt that fire to start her own company. So that was a really interesting situation. Has the full-time job 3 days a week with all of the benefits and the 401k, and 2 days a week works on her entrepreneurial endeavor. And she was collaborating with me as the architect of this space. For the graphic artwork throughout the space, I collaborated with an amazing artist named Jess Tiernan. Jess was a creative director, again, kind of post-pandemic or in the early months of the pandemic, as the creative director for Bedrock Detroit, which is one of the coolest, most community-based, most successful developers in that area. And during lockdown, post-pandemic, she had changes in her lifestyle, in her family. She wanted to move with her family, and she really wanted to have that flexibility in terms of her time, during the day, and how she wanted to organize her life. So I worked with Jess completely kind of as a 1099 freelancer for this project. And she would some days work 100% of the day, other days 0% of the day. And then there were times where she would work between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., focus on her family during the day, and then work again from 9 p.m. to midnight. And it was a perfect kind of flexible collaboration for this project. Robbie Jones was our photographer for the space. He has a full-time job and he's remote and work from home. So even though his company is based somewhere else, he lives close to New York, and he has added a few hours in the evenings, added a few hours in the weekends, so that he can continue to expand his portfolio as a freelance photography entrepreneur. The furniture was also a very interesting partnership in this space. So, when I say West Elm, we didn't just order pieces online. We actually had an amazing partnership with West Elm, who, really looked at this project, their design team, and really worked with us to help with these pieces to furnish the space. And what's so interesting about that is, as opposed to just buying the pieces online, the team at the human beings at West Elm, our project manager, Kristen, our head of sales, Ryan, those team members were within the context of a large corporation, but they had carved out their niche to be able to help with mission-based and community-based projects like this. So they were really able to refocus their energy and their work and their effort every day to something that was very meaningful for them within a very structured context. We also had a company called Hoke Home help us with the furniture for this space. Hoke Home is a company that was also born of the pandemic. These two guys in Brooklyn that had owned a fabrication studio for about 6 or 7 years, and did a lot of fabrication for office spaces. So of course, when the pandemic hit, all of their projects were shut down, and they decided to take the plunge into a totally different industry of furniture design and create work from home desks for everyone like you and me we're sitting here working from home, and have really kind of taken this other direction in a special way. And they have donated a lot of the furniture for this space, which was amazing. And finally, the last group that I wanted to mention are the corporate sponsors that partnered with Silicon Harlem to donate the tech, to make this space a reality, to connect them with the different executives at those companies. Because obviously each of these companies is, some of these companies have tens of thousands of employees or even more. They're enormous. But each of the human beings at these organizations that Silicon Harlem worked with whether it was, the head of community engagement or the head of built spaces, or these really special roles were carved out by those people who, similar to the positions at West Elm, who really kind of found a way to work themselves within that structure into a really meaningful position. So when you see all of this together, you can really kind of start to imagine how this mosaic came together between freelancers, entrepreneurs, full-time / part-time people, employees and leaders within corporate environments, all kind of coming together to create this very special design cluster. And just to show you visually kind of how that all came to life, these are a few images of the finished space. You can see our beautiful kind of branding and vinyls that we collaborated with Jess on, the furniture between Hoke Home and West Elm that really brings this kind of level of warmth and hospitality to the space that we really tried to balance with those kind of, glass and acrylic elements and kind of tech elements that would bring excitement and kind of a sense of wonder. So we were really trying to balance the two together. And just to show you guys this space, which is for the after school kids program, you can see, thinking about those corporate sponsors, how all of the technology that was donated really comes into play. And we were able to bring it all together as an innovation wall in the back, which highlights different technologies from XR to AI to 5G, 6G for these students to learn about in their after school program. And so I think that in all of these different ways of taking the plunge, we're going to start seeing a lot more of these flexible design clusters. And to define those even more specifically, it's expert teams of freelancers, of moonlighters, and corporate partners that are tailored to collaborate on specific projects for a finite amount of time, and that really end up being highly productive, highly cost-effective, and highly creative. And so I'm really interested in talking a little bit more in our next few minutes here about how I believe this is going to kind of impact the industry on a much grander scale. But I'd also love to hear from you guys in the chat, if you don't mind writing in the chat, if in the past year, let's say in the past year, have you been able to take the plunge in a direction that is exciting for you? You can go ahead and put it in the comments section. Or if you're dreaming of taking the plunge in, again, you can see here, whether it's as a freelancer, whether it's starting your own company, whether it's, moonlighting on the side of your full-time job, or even just hoping to carve out that niche within your existing, kind of workplace structure. I would love to hear from you guys how you're already doing that. I see someone here wrote that she was a 9 to 11er. Oh, that's Joanne. I was a 9 to 11er many times also. Oh, Joanne, that's so great. So Joanne says that she quit her architecture job and went to Monograph, which we are very grateful for. So we could be here today with you. And as we keep kind of going through this, feel free to continue to comment, and then we can touch on those specific ideas at the end during the Q&A. There are some really interesting comments here already. I'm excited to talk with you guys about that. So the reason that I think these flexible design clusters are so interesting as we move into this new era is that, first of all, you can lower your overhead costs as a firm. If I, as kind of a small startup design practice, had to hire people of this caliber, I would never be able to do it. They would each have, a six-figure salary that would require benefits, and it would be extremely cumbersome for a firm like myself. It also helps me to stay competitive, in terms of bigger firms that do have more overhead, because I'm able to pass on those savings directly to the client in terms of the fee for the project. The second point is, of course, the ability to bring on what I like to call sharpshooters or niche talent as required. For example, with the Silicon Harlem project, Jess could not have been more perfect. She had that amazing spatial graphics experience. She had done it in so many, amazing kind of public projects in Detroit and elsewhere. And she couldn't have been more perfect. For my next project, I needed something that was much more artistic and illustrative and almost more of a painted quality that I actually needed somebody else for. So having that ability to be extremely agile as needed for a specific project is extremely helpful. And I think the last point, which may even be the most poignant, is that we're in a historical moment right now of people, like we were saying at the beginning, wanting to be the masters of their own domain, wanting that moment of independence, of creativity, of flexibility. And so while freelancing, of course, has always existed, I think there's going to be this new explosion of flexible talent that can be brought on kind of by project. And so, where I really want to take this conversation to get us all thinking about is that really expresses kind of the impact that this could have on us as individuals, how we can take advantage of this moment, how we can kind of define our own path moving forward. But I also feel very hopeful that this will have a tremendous impact on the industry as a whole. And when I say industry, I mean the built environment, real estate, architecture, design, tech, branding, as it all comes together for the built environment specifically. So, the old school way of thinking about the built environment space was very siloed and segmented. Over here, we had real estate developers who had maybe, development, acquisitions, management. We had the architecture firm that was basically at the behest of ownership, at the behest of the client, obviously trying to push, their ideas forth for a greater building or a greater city or whatever they were designing, but ultimately really, at the whim of the owner. We had the branding agency, which, worst case scenario, unfortunately, could maybe come in at the end as like the last kind of lick of the paintbrush to pick a name and put it over the door in a very disintegrated kind of way. And, maybe a tech consultant that would come in and integrate a Nest thermostat or something to make, these buildings smart in more of like a superficial way. I truly believe, and we're seeing this already in so many examples, which we'll touch on, that the fact that these lines are starting to blur and architects are becoming owners and tech people are coming into real estate and everyone is thinking about their talents in a much more flexible way is going to have a tremendously positive impact industry-wide. And so here are a couple of examples of how we're already seeing that. This is a company called Live, Give, Play, which is actually a group. The ownership group is a developer, an architectural consultant, and a landscape architect who all came together as ownership, not as a design team, as owners of this brand and this building and buildings to come, to create developments that are specifically for ages 55 to 75, located near universities for people of that age that want intellectual stimulation and want to also have that sense of community. And, it's such an overlooked group. It's such an overlooked need, as opposed to kind of your typical OG real estate developer who would just build, the most expensive possible white boxes for whoever can afford them, and happens to be living in the area. These are very thoughtful. They're very empathetic. They're thought of in such an out of the box way that I truly believe was only possible because of this very multidisciplinary, flexible team that came together to design it. We, of course, I'm sure everyone on this call has heard of Neighbor, which is by, Bjarke, but also on his team of founders and the rest of the team, they have tech, they have development, they have all of these people from integrated backgrounds who, if you're not familiar with the concept of Neighbor, they're really kind of reinventing real estate development and also architectural design and also property management, and are building these apartments that have flexible layouts to accommodate your lifestyle, but are also creating these amazing kind of rent to own structures that allow people, regular people like you and me, to be able to afford to buy an apartment over time, even if they wouldn't be able to sign a mortgage up front. So again, very kind of flexible work arrangement and backgrounds to come together for this idea. This is an amazing company that was also born from the pandemic called Render and Real. And they do exactly what the name sounds like. They work with a brand. Here they have Fenty by Rihanna. They work with all kinds of brands and builders to design the space, to come up with the concept, and create the visualizations, the renderings. But then they also put together fabrication teams to build the space that matches the renderings exactly. I mean, everyone in the built environment knows how many times have we seen beautiful renderings and then the finished product looks nothing like that. And this founder, I know specifically, has a couple of principals kind of as the core group, but everyone else on their team comes from these flexible situations and flexible backgrounds on a very tailored, as needed basis. In one project, they may need just visualizations and branding. On another one, they may need a mill worker and an LED girl, so they really bring on these freelancers and people in flexible full-time situations who come together for the product. And just one final example, which I love, is a company called Saltbox, which is creating, the co-working of warehouse space. It's an incredibly special idea, and they're expanding across the United States. And the founders of this company also come from a background of tech, design, logistics, and through the pandemic have had to have with their employees very flexible situations in terms of amount of time allocated and kind of coming together for this space. So when we look at these different concepts, housing that's built for this overlooked niche kind of group of people, warehousing space for small businesses in this very out of the box human oriented kind of way, financial structures like for Neighbor that allow people to have access to purchasing where they wouldn't have had before. And we can really see that these new flexible arrangements will lead to highly inventive, highly empathetic, and impactful projects. I would also love to hear, by the way, in the chat from you guys, if you've seen any other examples of these kinds of really out of the box projects in the built environment, just because I'm a nerd and I would love to learn more about them. So my ending point would kind of be, if you're sitting there wondering, maybe you've been thinking about taking the plunge, maybe you have a friend who needs encouragement to take the plunge, how can you even start thinking about that? I just have a couple of suggestions for you guys, which definitely is what I did. Number one, find your niche and articulate your passions. When I started ground up, I really took about 2 months. I take kind of a long time with those things. I took like 2 months and I really, really thought about, what do I want to represent? What are my dream projects that I want to be working on? And how do I want to put that into words and also, digital presence and visuals for the world to understand what I want to do? And the amazing thing about doing that is that once I was able to articulate that and put it on a website and put it on my LinkedIn and put it in my Instagram, people from, my industry, other industries, prospective clients, freelancers who wanted to work with me, they came to me because they cared about the same things. And it's an incredibly powerful tool to think about just being able to put into words what you really care about. And especially in this new kind of flexible structure where everyone has, their own brand of structure to how they're working every day. Those people are looking for opportunities and they are looking for people who care about the same things they care about. And if you put your passions out there, those people will find you also. And you'll be much happier working together when you care about the same things. This might sound like an obvious one, but it has a caveat, which is to join networks and forums to find other people working on stuff that you might find interesting. My kind of asterisk to this would be that post-pandemic, I think there have always been like very kind of more siloed organizations, like specifically for architects, specifically for real estate brokers, specifically for general contractors. Post-pandemic, there are a lot of networks, which I'd be happy to share with you guys, that do have a much more nuanced, kind of look at bringing people together that's much more mission-based as opposed to industry-based. So for example, one network that I joined is called Brick and Wonder. It's a really incredible network that brings together people from real estate development, architectural design, tech, construction, and kind of brings everyone together into the same room to talk about the same topics and meet each other. That, has also kind of exploded post-pandemic for just this reason. And finally, the last thing I would say is to be proactive, to take action and join in, offer your services, participate in these new flexible clusters. I'll give you an example of doing that. If you see someone on LinkedIn who's sharing a project that you say, oh my God, that's exactly what I love. That's, I could really have seen what my role could have been on a project like that. Send them a message, write a comment, jump in there. It's really a moment where people are looking to find each other in, when they have kind of are able to join in on these flexible teams together and bring things to life. So I thank you guys so much for listening in on this, and I'm excited to check out the comments and continue the conversation. Oh, Joanne, I think you're on mute.
There you go.
We will always have the mute problem. Like as long as we live, there will never be a day that someone doesn't have to tell me I'm on mute.
I know it's like my daily life, but that was great. I loved your presentation because
Thank you so much.
I came from a branding and architecture background, so merging those together, having those like experience, I think it's just where design is going next, and I am very very excited for this conversation. We do have some questions.
Sure.
Shireen is asking, I have recently quit my job so I could start my own non-conventional firm. How did you meet your first client, and where do you go to network and meet clients and also other freelancers?
Amazing question. I think we may have covered this a little bit at the end, but first of all, Sharon, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, congratulations. I'm so proud of you. That's so cool that you're doing that. So what I would say is that, I got so I can kind of speak anecdotally and then we can talk bigger picture. When I started my firm, my first client was through a friend who I had actually been having weekly calls for the past 2 years. I've been having a weekly call with a friend who knew very intimately my background and my specialty, and was able to connect me with someone who really needed that. So that certainly goes back to being very vocal, reaching out to people already in your existing network, grabbing a Zoom coffee with them like we're all doing now, and just like letting them know what you're about, and going back to that like niche messaging of like, this is what I love, this is what I'm great at, and just like word of mouth references. My second client is someone I reached out to on LinkedIn. I promise this is not a LinkedIn ad. I just really like LinkedIn. But it's someone that, I've been following him for a while. I thought he was doing really cool stuff. It kind of goes back to the third point, actually. And I just messaged him. I was still in my full-time job, actually. And I told him, hey, I'm about to start something new. I see you, he had just launched his own company, said, I see you're starting something new. We should connect. And actually at the time, he didn't really have anything going on that he needed me for. And he called me a month later when I had started my firm. So I think, the second point, that second anecdote would be like reaching out to people that you think are doing cool things and just kind of introducing yourself. And especially people who are starting something new always need collaborators and help, and may even need something like branding or architectural design that they don't even know that they need yet. And so you'll be, right at the front door when they realize it's time for that.
I love that. As everyone will know, I love LinkedIn as well. So you're like talking my language in this whole presentation. So very
I'm
cool.
so glad. You know what? I have to tell you, I've never been much of a LinkedIn girl. And when I started my company, I found it to be the most useful social platform. Everyone's interested in collaborating. I hardly ever reach out to someone and don't get a response. Like everyone's
Yeah,
always interested. So it's great.
totally
Not getting
agree.
a commission, I promise.
We love LinkedIn here at Monograph. So um, we have another question. How
Yes.
do you get these people on board, like Westham or other corporate
Mm.
sponsors? Do you reach out to them? How do you form these design clusters, as you call them?
Really a myriad different ways. There are a couple of companies I'm working on partnerships with. I'll keep it kind of confidential, but there's a really big one where, okay, again with the LinkedIn, I'm sorry to keep bringing LinkedIn, but I looked up who is their head of partnerships. And I found that person specifically, as opposed to just emailing, the general inbox, found their email and just sent them like hopefully a non-creepy email that was like really passionate about what I'm working on and the specific project and what we would need from them or be interested in. And I think that people at that corporate level are very interested in hopefully actually being, or at least in appearing, mission based at the moment, and like creating impact and projects like this. So it's kind of a combination of like finding the right person as opposed to just kind of like a general email, and also kind of positioning your messaging to them in a way that they could, that's kind of would be like good PR for them, basically.
Yeah. So again, LinkedIn is amazing. Um, and
Oh gosh.
another question here we
Yeah.
have, how do you maintain your network of collaborators? Is the
Mm.
idea to have different sets of collaborators for every project on a as needed basis?
That's a really interesting question. So, you know what? So far, I mean, I've had my design practice for about 4 months, so maybe we can talk again in a year. But so far, it's been a combination. There are a few people who we are so vision aligned that we really would like to work together on many projects going forward. And we're already on the second or third project. There are other, collaborators like Jess, for example, who happen to be perfect for the Silicon Harlem project. And we'll obviously always stay in touch. And I'm sure I'll have things for her and she'll have things for me. But that's much more on kind of a project by project basis. So I think especially, working on much larger teams, it's obviously nicer to work with people who who you've worked with before. So it's kind of, I think, a combination. I think will continue to be a combination.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this kind of go with the next question. Was this design cluster structure that you have, do you plan it right from the beginning of the project?
Well, I'm not sure if this person is asking if it was like, if that was my intention or if I had the whole team kind of mapped out. So maybe I'll answer both. The answer to both actually is definitely not. When I started the Silicon Harlem project, at this point, I'm like getting very intentional with those things. But I would say, the Silicon Harlem project, it was my first project that was basically not just myself. So it was really a matter of kind of putting, the dog whistle call out into the world and seeing who responded. And that very organically just kind of came as, this structured and collaborative team altogether. But for projects since then and for future projects, now as I'm also getting to know very specific people and their specific strengths and what they're interested in working on, I feel very strongly that my model for team building will continue to be bringing on these agile team members, some of them that I've worked with forever, others of them that I'm bringing on specifically for this project, but kind of building out that rainbow of collaborators from the beginning. And really, this is a whole other, hour-long session, but really also using digital platforms to be able to keep that organized.
Yeah, that would, I think, be very helpful for a lot of, especially smaller firms that are just starting. And we actually talked about this in the RFP proposal section before this, that like if you can team up with other smaller firm as well, and forming that is definitely best for you if you're just starting and you're smaller. So Tim has another question here. It's kind of a long question, so I'm gonna try to deal with that.
Let's go for it.
So he said project-based clusters is a great concept for tech, but the projects are much longer for architecture and development. So let's say you are working on developing concepts on a number of fronts and one of them hits, you accept it, then a month in everything is clicking fast when another comes back. So how do you prioritize different projects? How do you stay focused on the project that you've committed to when it runs for another 10 months? And then the dream project comes calling.
Contracts, legal agreements. I think I'm like half joking, but I feel like that's kind of, the answer. Obviously, you're 100% right. Like Silicon Harlem, 3,000 square foot space, 2 to 3 month project. It was very specific and kind of constrained in terms of the amount of time that we required from each person, for sure. I'm also working on very large scale development projects right now, including a 1,500 unit master plan in Miami and 150, another 1,000 unit building in Jersey City. So those are definitely different in terms of like your core team, your general contractor, your, architect, your interior designer. Those, of course, have to be locked in by a contract for a very long time. However, there are kind of, in my experience in development, there are these micro projects within each of those stages whether it's for art collaborations or local partnerships or, hiring local within the economy, within the local economy, where there are opportunities to create these micro design clusters that I think that could be really effective for, even within the context of like a more traditional, very long-term development project.
Yeah, I think it's like kind of like a scaling problem where you're taking multiple cluster and putting them together into a bigger cluster.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, if you think about a development project, it's like the design cluster and then just like stretching it out with a legal agreement over several years. But I think even within the context of development, and especially once the project is coming to life, like once you're coming to the end of construction and you're about to open your doors or whatever stage it may be, there definitely are these opportunities to bring in individuals who are interesting for that. But like you're saying, Joanne, in terms of scale, we're also going to be seeing many, many more of those like traditional team members, interior designers, architecture firms, landscape architects, who do much more than just that and have that flexibility within their own structure. So they'll almost bring that kind of like interesting multidisciplinary aspect to a project.
Yeah, I love that. How do you then contractually work together? Like, I think this is getting very technical.
I would say, just because we have a couple of minutes left, so like very broad brush, it's just with someone that you're going to need on a project for 2 years, maybe even more. That's a very significant contract. With these types of more micro projects like Silicon Harlem that we were talking about, that can also be applied at certain stages of a much bigger project. I've done that as just 1099.
Yeah, short and simple. Thank you, Karen. That was a very interesting conversation.